Good afternoon, everyone. So here we are in Q2, and finally, what a joy it is to bring, it is admittedly some marginally good news, but good news nevertheless. And those of you that have tuned in the past and heard us for previous quarters, you might have thought, gosh, this chap only ever talks about the doom and gloom. And really, that's what the message has been for the past four quarters, and not so much so doom and gloom, but pedestrian, very pedestrian performance. We know base rates were going to be sustained. We know demand, there wasn't much demand on aggregate in the market. And so it's quite refreshing to come to you with yesterday's data published yesterday, on it turning up a little bit. And again, it's green shoots as opposed to the raw scale and absolute growth that we've seen in the past quarter, but it has ultimately led us to revise up our manufacturing output forecast and indeed outpace our wider UK GDP forecast for 2024. The 2025 story isn't quite as shiny, but it hasn't gone backwards. So if we can have the first slide, please. What we'll do is we'll go over the key messages, and then we'll go through and interrogate some of these metrics bit by bit. But to start with, as I hinted at, and let's move that out of the way. To start with, so demand-led improvement. So what I mean by that is that orders are outpacing output, and this is a really good sign in the short term. It means we can be quite confident that we will see output grow in the next quarter in terms of our balance figures. We've seen this, basically, we've had the repeat of what we saw last quarter, but to about twice the scale in terms of those balance figures, which gives us a really good trajectory to be confident that in the third quarter, assuming no other significant economic shocks in that intervening period before we hit the third quarter of the year, that we'll see our balance figure for output grow again. It's been a little while since we've been able to take that sort of position that we're on a slow, steady growth trajectory, but it does seem to be the case, at least the data would indicate it. Now, in the short term, and this is a controversial one, so I present the data without too much comment, but in that intervening period between Q1 and Q2, our orders metric has showed that where that demand has come from, it's actually being led by export orders in the short term. Now, there is some what's the word I'm looking for? There is some friction between short-term ONS export figures and industry analysts, including ourselves and other bodies that look at the manufacturing sector, that have also suggested in the past couple of months that actually export orders have been growing. I think one of the core points, and those of you with a good memory last quarter might remember, we rang the alarm bell a little bit around supply side price inflation, which is attained to this third bullet point here. Now, what we saw is that without any easement in the base rate, which we still haven't seen, we're yet to have the June Bank of England meeting, but we saw price setting behavior start to grow again, having been consistent, the rate of price setting behavior having consistently come down for 4 consecutive quarters, and that'll be illustrated quite clearly when we get to that slide. Not too much of a story here this quarter about labor and investment. Investment intentions remain in a holding pattern. You've got the double-edged sword of that political uncertainty in an incoming election that actually, through recent data we found, has less of an impact on capital expenditure plans than perhaps one might have thought through intuition. But it's that cost of capital and that uncertainty because of the heightened risk that capital expenditure entails with the current cost of capital that's keeping those investment intentions oscillating around a positive but low level. Labor, we are seeing some growth in employment, but really there's more of a story around vacancies and those coming down. And I'll save that bit for when we get to that slide. Confidence and we'll see this as well, confidence has remained remarkably robust over the past 4 months and actually sees its largest positive jump since the end of 2022, but also is now at commensurate levels to where the highest it's been really in the past 10 years. Why is this like this, given we're not seeing explosive performance? And we'll talk about that as well. Now, onto the forecast, I hinted just before we got onto this, that if you look at the bottom point there, 2024 1.2, we've actually revised that upwards since the Q1 forecast for manufacturing GVA of 0.8. Now, that's not a massive revision, and also the scale of these figures isn't that much to write home about, but it is positively revised. So really the takeaway is that it's looking better, and I actually wouldn't be surprised by Q3 if we end up revising our forecast slightly upwards again. And I say slightly because we're unlikely to see growth in the 2.5s and so on, but it's really the 2025 figure that brings some interest, right? So you see 0.8% there for manufacturing GVA. That's what it was last quarter. you can see actually in the short term, we expect manufacturing growth to outpace the wider economy in terms of aggregate the whole wider economy, UK GDP. But in the longer term, still 2025, about half the scale of that wider economy. Now, this is probably a down, a pessimistic forecast, if it, erring on the pessimistic side. But if to give us room to revise that upwards somewhat as we move towards 2025. But again, we're likely to only raise it if we do by a tenth of a percentage point. So you'd be looking at 0.9 to 1 to perhaps on a very sunny day 1.1 before we even enter 2025. Plus, it's harder to look what's going on, over a year and a half away. But that is where it currently stands. So that modest outlook in the distance remains, but it's the improvements in the short term that we're seeing. So if I could have the next slide, please. So output and orders. So health warning as always, and I know some of you might be familiar with this data. Where you see these bars for output and orders colored red and orange respectively, it is not to be interpreted as an absolute change. So where you see it might be at around 20%, it does not suggest that output increased by 20% in that quarter. What these represent is a balance of change figure for the proportion of this industry. So it suggests that this proportion, a given proportion, suggested more so that that output was increasing versus decreasing in the same for orders. Why we do this way, I'm more than happy to take a question if someone's interested at the very end, but I'll save that for now. But if we draw attention to the far right, you'll get a sense of what I was sort of talking about at the start. You see the orders bar leading output, and now consecutively 2 quarters in a row, and almost doubling in scale, really. Now you can see that the total balance of these figures is modest, at least compared to this 6-year time series. And also, as I say, this is just it's actually a bit more than 6 years, no, it's about 6 years, 6-year snapshot, but this data goes back 30 years consistently in this form. Now you might be drawing your attention to 2023 Q4, where you see that red bar really pip, but orders are not there. And that's why we know we can't get too excited in moments like that 23 Q4, because while there was a sudden delivery of growth and output, it's not backed up by the commensurate demand levels vis-a-vis orders. And so we know that's not going to be sustained. And indeed, that's what we didn't see in 24 Q1. What we want to see and what we like to see is this kind of steady pattern that we're seeing in the far right 2 groupings, where orders are leading output, and then we leapfrog and we see that again. And that's what gives us that indication when we combine all the other factors, what we know about the state of the UK's manufacturing economy at the moment, that we can be quietly confident that we'll see a similar position next quarter, but at a greater scale. So demand outpacing output, but both have grown in scale. Have the next slide, please. And now this chart breaks down that mix of orders. So how I've been talking about demand, and what I really want you to look at is just to the right of the green box bar. And now I know we're really in the reeds here with the scale of it, but you'll see export orders have really carried that order growth in that intervening period between Q1 and Q2, where we are today. You can probably just about see UK orders there after a very flat even breakdown last quarter. But really what I want to talk about on this slide is the green box bar there, and you might see a couple of those throughout this presentation, and they're of particular interest. Now typically what they are is they're not our forecast, they're the sector's future expectations. So what I mean by that is we haven't manipulated this at all. This is direct in from the sector about what the sector thinks on any given metric, the balance figures they will post for that coming quarter. So in this case, Q3. Now, very large, you might notice. And you might notice, if you remember previous editions of this, they were overly optimistic and perhaps overly large in the previous quarter and the quarter before that. It's been about 3, arguably 4 consecutive quarters of overestimation from the sector. So what does this mean? Why does the sector keep effectively over-egging where it thinks it's going to post these balance figures and not quite come in? Now, if we have the next slide, we'll see a bit more about that. So what you're looking at here is effectively an overlay between the expected output and orders from the sector in the previous quarter versus the data that actually comes in. Now, of course, this covers quite a long period, about 9 years here, but I want you to focus your attention on the far right, where you can see actually for the past 2 consecutive quarters, we've almost had identical situations, except growth in both instances. So you'll see on the far right, the bars for output and orders, the expectation set in Q1 was actually far higher than what the data's come in as represented by the dots within the bars. And the same is said for 24 Q1 there, where you can see, although the scale is lower, the overestimation still existed. A bit of a better estimation in the previous quarter, but if we go back one more, which is 23 Q3, you can see that actually expectations were raucously high and reality was far from it. That's really beside the point, because what does it mean? There's two things that it, really could mean. Often in times of turbulence, you could the takeaway, the intuition is that the UK's manufacturing business environment is so unpredictable that sector keeps missing its mark. However, we do know through the confidence figure and other metrics that actually the UK's manufacturing environment is the most stable it's been, relatively speaking, for some time. Because of course, the past year, and we'll see this in confidence, relative to the past 4 years, which has been a sort of incessant onslaught of COVID straight into the bounce back period, a positive period, but an unusual and disruptive one nevertheless, that eventually brought on that supply side price spiraling and inflation both in the UK and globally, then immediately moving into the energy cost crisis, with all the while a labor shortage challenge that emerged acutely, that has long stood in the sector, but acutely emerged after the pandemic. And we'll talk about that when we get to the labor side a little bit more. So have the next slide, please. One of the things I really want to pull out is that prices discussion that I mentioned at the very start. So I mentioned that we sort of rang the alarm a little bit last quarter. And you'll see here, now you'll have to follow my words quite closely because I'm going to describe this curve and I don't have a pointer to put across the screen. But if you look just 2 bars or 3 bars in from the right, you'll see actually the UK price and export prices bar, it sort of bucks the trend that you've seen 4 quarters previous with that that mountain essentially climbing down. But before I get any further, I'll say what you're looking at here is representing the balance figures in red for UK prices and orange for export prices, and effectively the price setting behavior of the industry. It's the proportion industry that indicated quarter on quarter whether they've raised their domestic prices or raised their export prices. Now, if you look at around the 23 Q1 area, which is just where that mountain starts climbing down, of course, that was the severe part of price inflation where you see that extended high mountain, but it started consistently coming down quarter on quarter. It didn't ever go into remission in sense, but the scale of the proportion of industry that were raising those prices was declining rapidly. And then we get to last quarter where actually it pips up again. Now, why is this? And there's no real reason. This what got us scared around stagflation. The cost of capital, as set by the base rate, hadn't changed. There wasn't a sudden uptick in demand really in the sector that would drive that kind of inflationary or shortage-induced inflation. So it was a curious point, and one that made us worry a little bit if we saw again in this quarter in today's data that supply side inflation as measured by the price setting behavior start to creep up. So we can somewhat relieved that if we look just to the bar to the left of the green box bar, that actually it's come in at a similar level to 23 Q4. It hasn't continued the downward trajectory, but it certainly hasn't continued on that expansionary path that it signaled that it may in that previous quarter. But now looking to the green box bar, that is the expectation that price setting behavior will continue to reduce. But we know from many of our other metrics that the sector is being over optimistic at the moment about where these balance figures are. So it's our thought that actually the balance figures price setting behavior will come in similar, or perhaps even arguably a touch above where they are today, and not continue that downward trajectory, if the form of the past 3 quarters of overestimation in the positivity in these future metrics that the sector gives to us is to be true. Now, quick mention on margins as represented here by these lines. These are balance figures for margins. And you can see, and then the zero line is just slightly offset on the right-hand side, but effectively we're just in negativity for UK margin export margins. But again, that expectation moving into the green box bar, the sector reports that margins on aggregate will return to growth in the coming quarter. However, given that overestimation, again, that I talk about, I'd take that with a pinch of salt. The next slide, please. Confidence, something really important that hooks all of this together about, perhaps some things are not to be so worried about, as I mentioned about in pricing. Now, if we look at the sort of right-hand tail of this, which accompanies about a year and a half going from 2024 Q2 to perhaps even long, 23 Q1, you can see it's been robustly positive for some time. And just to describe what you're looking at, this is a diffusion index, which is a silly word for basically above 5 means positive, below 5 means negative. The red line representing the aggregate view of the sector's confidence about its own business, and then the orange line representing the view of the sector on the wider UK economy. Now, if we look at the red line on the far right, really for the past 5 quarters, you can see there's been remarkably consistently positive and flat, really, but flat in a good sense, flat that's staying in that 6.5 territory. And in the past 2 quarters, growing ever so slightly, but actually being the most significant uptick since 22 Q4, and bringing it to a level, as you can see even visually on this graph, a level similar to what we've seen the highest in the past 8 to 10 years or so there, as signaled around the 2017, 2018 Q3 area, right? Apart from in terms of the sustenance of that. Because we had the peak in that recovery period, as illustrated there in 21 Q3. But as with so many things, with so many of the metrics, it was always going to be a short-lived peak, and it was a very taxing time to be a forecaster in the industry. But the point I'm trying to make here is that does this mean that people like myself are too in the reads about these small-term movements? Because overall, the confidence of the sector is demonstrably robust over the past year and a half and continues to do so and grow ever so slightly as well. So good sign there. Next slide, please. Now we're looking finally at employment and investment, and not too much of a story here this quarter. I'll talk a little bit about vacancies because that has changed. But what you're looking at here is the red bars representing the balance balance figure for employment, and the orange line representing the balance figure for investment intentions. Critical difference with investment intentions is that this is something that we elicit every 3 months, but it's a rolling 12-month intention. So at any quarter, it's the sector's expectation, its view on its next 12 months of capital expenditure. Now you see here the red bars there, just to the left of the green box bar, for the past 3 quarters have been expansionary, relatively consistent, but indeed the scale of what's considered growth even within this starting in 2016 period, the total figures are modest. Looking at the green box bar, going on this consistent trend with the green box bar, this is not an overestimation in this case, because in this case, what this bar represents is the intention to employ. And of course, really what it illustrates is the labor shortage in the sector. That is the demand for labor captured in these balance figures for employment within the sector. And a note on that, of course, I always like to mention vacancies. I think it's a very interesting point when we're looking at the labor market in the UK sector. There's currently about 64,000, give or take 1,000, and it's always rounded to the nearest 1,000 anyway. 64,000 live vacancies in the UK's manufacturing sector. Now, as a ratio, in early 2022, as a ratio, that's about 2.4, and that's official statistics. So 2.4 jobs vacant in the sector for every 100 employed. Now, since the end of the pandemic, that peaked at in the start of July 2022. That peaked at 4 jobs vacant for every 100 employed. And it's important to understand that for the 30-year average before 2021, say, that long-term average is about 1.8 to 2. So really, the demand for labor, as proxy by that, was twice as hot at the start of July 2022. And it's been sustained at around the 3.53 mark ever since. Now, in the past 3 or 4 months, or 5 months even, it's started to consistently come down. Now, it can come down for 2 reasons. Either vacancies are being filled, great, or perhaps more concerning and perhaps closer to the truth is vacancies are being closed because they're now surplus to demand. So vacancies isn't a perfect metric to understand what's going on with the labor market, but it is a strong indicator. So now currently at 2.4 vacancies per 100 employed in the sector, we're getting close to that sort of latent baseline figure for the 30 years prior. And we can demonstrate that with the growth in the past 3 quarters of our employment balance figure, we know for a fact that a decent proportion of those vacancies are closed because they are being filled. But at the same time, over the past 3 quarters, we know we've had low demand conditions. So it's quite expected that some of these vacancies have been closed due to be no longer need to surplus demand, or at least in the short term, that order books haven't been there to support that growth in employment over the past year or so. If I have the next slide, please. Now, this is just a visualization of what I mentioned at the start of our forecast. So what you're looking at here, if you look at the middle bar, essentially graphing of those very small figures. The bars look very big, but actually the figures are not that large. But nevertheless, that red bar in the middle bar in 2024 for manufacturing, that is what's been revised upwards from 0.8 to 1.2. So previously having been beneath that GDP forecast, that is now beneath that 1.2. Splitting hairs a little bit, but it's quite a rare sight that within this body of work to see our expectation for the manufacturing growth to exceed that of the wider growth of the economy. But moving into 2025, as I mentioned, our optimism doesn't really go out that far yet, except I would say these are on the side of pessimism, not optimism, but any change that will come to them will be slight under current expectations. Can I have the next slide, please, which will also be the final slide. Now, this is the exact same as the first slide. And the reason I put this here is because, of course, I've given you a lot of information there, and it's a lot to take away, and I wouldn't blame you if you haven't caught it all. So just 3 points really to take away, I think, to focus on, that the headline points. We're confident next quarter that we'll see output grow in terms of the balance figure relative to this quarter, for the reasons I outlined about that balance between orders. The growth is looking healthy on aggregate, that will support that continued but mild growth in output next quarter. Second point, our alarm bells around supply side inflation spiraling have cooled. We're not completely off standby because price setting behavior, as you've seen, remains positive and consistent. Positive in the sense of, not that it's necessarily a good thing, but positive in the sense that it still exists, it's still there, but the total level of it has come back down roughly in trend with what we've seen over the past year. What happens when the June MPC meeting meets and the subsequent effect on price setting behavior is yet to be seen. However, realistically, it will take a few quarters for that to bear out in the data. It won't be an overnight thing. Final third point, I want to hook on confidence. Confidence, the sector's confidence is not just high, but as I've shown you there, for a year and a half, remained quite robust. So why is this there? We talked about why this is there. It's really the driving force of that is the relative predictability and calmness of the UK's manufacturing business environment relative to the previous 4 years. And that's the really important point, relative to the previous 4 years. It's been a constant onslaught in the business environment for the sector over the past few years. So now in the past 4 quarters, it's relatively consistent, and that's being borne out by those confidence figures. So thank you very much. And I'll hand you over now to Jeroen.
Thanks, James. Hello, everyone. I am Jeroen Basten. I'm a partner in BDO Digital, where we help organizations with business-led transformation services. Now, I've got over 18 years of experience in professional services. My focus has been very much on both digital risk as well as digital transformation. So I help organizations in the manufacturing and the consumer space with using technology to improve both efficiency as well as controls. And I wanted to welcome you to a panel session today where we're going to talk about the role of digital transformation in manufacturing. We're really going to delve into how digital unlocks a wealth of opportunities, from both streamlining operations to enhancing customer experience and driving innovation. However, we all know that this type of journey is not without its challenges, right? Integrating new technologies, managing data security, upskilling the workforce. They're just a few of the hurdles that organizations encounter during implementations. So to navigate these complexities, we've brought together a panel of industry experts who will share their insight and experience. So let me introduce them to you. First of all, we've got Andy Souyave. Andy works as a director in BDO Digital, and prior to that, he's worked for about 12 years in the technology risk practice of one of the big 4 professional services firms. And he's got significant experience on working on digital-enabled business transformation projects. Then we've got Phill Elston, operations director at Brompton Bicycles, and has spent 20 years in the manufacturing sector. He initially worked as a production operator before taking an apprenticeship in manufacturing engineering at an aerospace foundry in Devon, implementing process improvements and lean methodologies. Since then, Phill has worked in industrial hydraulics, composites, metal fabrication, and 3D printing. And Phill has spent the last 15 years in leadership positions, specializing in operational turnaround and growth challenges, with, of course, digital being a key enabler for him in this space. Then we've got Tim Andrews, a lead advisor for digital transformation at the Manufacturing Technology Center, with responsibility to support companies in adopting digitalization in the manufacturing processes. With a career spanning over 40 years, he joined MTC in 2017, having spent over 25 years in leadership roles in information technology businesses, most recently concerned with the design, the development, and the delivery of cloud-based applications for blue-chip FMCG manufacturers. Starting out as a mechanical engineer, Tim also worked in technical, commercial, and leadership roles in a broad range of companies, including British Steel, GKN, Massey Ferguson, and Yale Material Handling. And then we've got Nina. Nina Gryf is a senior policymaker at Make UK. leading a number of initiatives and campaigns, including the Unlocking Innovation campaign, which emphasizes the pivotal role of innovation and technology in enhancing productivity and competitiveness, as well as Make UK's Innovation Monitor, which monitors manufacturers' digital adoption process. Nina is a vocal advocate for accelerating digital adoption among manufacturers and policymakers and champions initiatives like Make Smarter. So let's start. I wanted to point my first question towards Tim. Tim, I was really wondering, digital transformation can significantly enhance manufacturing processes. And I'd love your thoughts on some examples of what you're seeing at MTC in terms of how digital solutions are being used to improve operational efficiency and productivity.
Thanks, Jeroen. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I mean, with some of the work we do at the MTC, it's very much developing some of those new technologies. So we are working with lots of capabilities, which I suppose look at more of the cutting edge stuff. But if we look more at the industrial customers and the demands we're seeing from those in terms of the capabilities, it predominantly looks at things like increased use of business intelligence, a lot of work involving system selection, so people improving the capabilities of their current systems, but more importantly, moving from what was predominantly siloed systems to something that's integrated into their business process. So very much looking at that integration capability. And other areas such as machine connectivity, so actually integrating that into something like a manufacturing execution system to really understand what's happening in the business. And overarching over that is that business visualization, that operational intelligence, that business intelligence, to see what's happening in the process, to make decisions, to be able to understand and improve efficiency and productivity. So a wealth of technologies, but not necessarily cutting edge at the moment. Really better use of existing technologies but doing a better job of integrating them.
Okay, thanks, Tim. I'm just going to link in with one of the points you mentioned, like the integrated systems piece. I think, in our recent survey, and Phill, I'd like to direct this one at you, 73% of manufacturers say that they believe that ERP systems and integrating technologies such as that are really worthwhile digital transformation investment. What's your experience at Brompton Bicycles with ERP systems and the value they bring?
Well, we went through an implementation with an Infor ERP system about 3 years ago now. And I think one of the things that Tim said, which is really interesting, is a business that's looking at ERP systems. I think historically, or probably 5 years ago, a lot of the larger ERP sort of providers were looking at how they made a one-stop shop that did everything all under one umbrella. And if you're an SME, that's quite a daunting thing to face. But it also makes those solutions quite difficult to apply to the quite widespread user cases in manufacturing, especially with the sort of elements of 3PL as part of the logistics sort of supply chain as well. So I think probably what we're seeing now in the market is ERP systems that are maybe more sort of focus on the core competencies of being a good sort of ERP sort of module or node, and then having better connectivity with best in breed warehouse management systems or MES systems are the ones that are actually are easier to integrate because the integration costs and the initial sort of launch costs are a bit cheaper. And you can find a configuration of sort of bolt-on modules that suit your business. So I think as an SME, or depending on the sort of size of business, look at where you're going to be in 3 to 5 years, because that tends to be the technology horizon that ERP systems seem to be sort of designed for anyway. And think about what you're going to need in that 3 to 5 year time, because the first year you're going to be really spent learning it. So you're not going to get huge benefit in the first year. So just be okay with that. But sort of from the 1 year plus, you're really in the sweet spot of getting the most out of the system. And then in the last year, you're really thinking about what you want next and where your business is going to be in the next 5 years. So I think you have to really be thinking about ERP as a very long-term decision, and think about how you bolt on best-in-breed modules that suit your business and where you're going to grow to in the most effective way.
Thanks, Phill. I really recognize what you're saying there. I think you're absolutely spot on that, a lot of organizations now have almost like best of breed systems for maybe procurement, HR, master data governance, BI and visualization, with some sort of finance backbone that underpins it, rather than having a single system that does absolutely everything for them. You did mention that you went through the ERP implementation for Info relatively recently. Can I ask a follow-up question? I'd be really interested to hear what sort of challenges you faced as an organization whilst implementing that, and how you overcome them, so others can learn from that.
I mean, I think with any ERP system or any digital system you put in, you also try and work out who's going to be area experts for each of the different sort of like modules or processes. So having those sort of power users is always key, and that network of power users is really important. But one of the things that we spent time discussing, and also I'm leaning into a little bit of a previous business that I worked in to answer this, is you have to make a decision where you're going to make your business match ERP normal, or whether you're going to customize the ERP system to match how your business operates. And there's not just one answer to that. You have to look at each of your processes and just decide whether you want to just take a normal industry standard sort of order acceptance process, or whether your business is so niche, such a corner case, that you need to configure an ERP system or pay for bespoke integration or bespoke sort of development to make the ERP system tailored to your very niche requirement, and really challenge the team that tell you need to make it niche, because actually sometimes they're working in quite a old way that's based on an old system methodology, when actually there could be just a smarter, cleaner, more simple way. And certainly when you come into like the patches and the sort of like the new releases every sort of month, then having lots and lots of bespoke development can become quite challenging. So I think sticking as close to core ERP as possible is just sensible. I've very rarely hear a silly suggestion coming out of an ERP structured sort of proposal. But just be aware that there are sometimes situations where your business might have something that's very niche that it might need a development, and it may be better to use a module to manage that rather than trying to get the core to do it. But that's some of our learnings were kind of based around those conversations. Is be aware how you match the physical to the digital, which ones you need.
I hear you. So stay vanilla wherever possible, but don't be afraid of customizing an area that is really bespoke to your business to get a competitive advantage. Okay. Yeah. I was wondering, Nina, I mean, what we hear from a survey is that nearly 60% of manufacturers tell us that digital transformation is a priority for their business, but they also struggle to say that they've got the capacity to deliver large-scale transformation programs. Can you maybe share some insights into Made Smarter and the value that they bring in driving innovation in the sector?
Definitely. So manufacturers are aware of the digital technologies, what sort of benefits and huge impact they can bring while invested in the businesses. A huge increase in productivity, efficiency, and slashing the cost of running business. However, the kind of the huge productivity gains we see in the wider economy when these technologies are being adopted by the smaller to medium businesses, because they are the majority of the manufacturing firms in the UK. So this is where the Made Smarter adoption program comes in, because it addresses the productivity gap within the small to medium businesses in manufacturing sector. And so I'm kind of going to go back a little bit. In 2017, when the Made Smarter review was published and the Commission published the report, and they addressed the productivity, that the SMEs are lagging with the productivity, they introduced the Made Smart adoption program, and the program piloted in the Northwest. And with a huge success, engaged with hundreds of SMEs. And I think what really worked and was explored by the report was the comprehensive help that could be provided for the SMEs. So the barriers that we can see that businesses are facing is the access to skills, access to finance, and access to impartial expertise. And this is something that that program provides for SMEs. So they will have the initial conversation with the business. What is it that they need? They will map the digital road for them. They will be with them for a couple of days while adopting the digital technologies. They will there's a little bit of hand-holding. There's a lot of training as well for the leadership, and for the people who are involved with these technologies. So I think it's not only about, okay, we're going to give you a little bit of match funding pot of the money, but there's also this kind of a comprehensive, more complex advice and addressing the needs of the smaller businesses that they don't usually have the resources as the larger manufacturers. The Made Smarter adoption program exists in the Northwest, runs for successful couple of years. It's been extended in West Midlands, East Midlands, Northwest. I really hope I haven't missed anyone. I know that the West Midlands is working closely with the MTC, helping manufacturers in Midlands. And there is a wider rollout in London and South East, so hopefully Brompton will be able to use it at some point in the near future. So for example, to give you a quick example of one of our members who used the Made Smarter in Midlands was the small custom fine joinery manufacturer. They invested in the robotic arm. They used the sanding processes within the manufacturing, and the efficiency and productivity increase was phenomenal. They invested £60,000, and that return on investment happened within a year. The staff who were previously working handling the manual sander were trained up, skilled up, and they could be used in a better quality, more complex role. So it kind of worked for everyone. They didn't have to the robot didn't really it replaced, but it didn't remove that job opportunity as well. It kind of increased the job opportunity for people who were already based there. They also connected the equipment to the iCloud, which helped them as well to see and predict any downtime and be more having the production more visible.
Mm-hmm. That's some great examples of how to use it directly for improvements in the actual manufacturing process. I was wondering, Andy, of course, artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies are making waves in a number of sectors. And in our survey, only about 30% of manufacturers felt that AI was sufficiently advanced or mature to make it central to their digital transformation ambition. I'd love to get your view on how are technologies such as AI being applied in manufacturing, and what potential do you see for them in the future?
Yeah, and Jeroen, I'm not overly surprised by the lack of optimism in that space. I think if we look at what Tim was saying before, a lot of the people in manufacturing are very focused on getting good quality ERPs in, as Phill was saying, doing that kind of implementation, or just getting a real handle on their data and starting to get better business intelligence. And one of the biggest things in manufacturing at the moment, when people really try and do investments in things like AI, is that they are finding that their data governance and the data quality isn't up to scratch. So you need to have that really robust set of data to be able to get the artificial intelligence to train, learn, and do something useful with it. But that's not to say that there isn't anything going on in that space at the moment. So things like Microsoft Copilot, Google Duet, other such technologies are really helping people to do things like write reports, do basic coding, things along those lines. We've got chatbots that have been around for years, obviously, that people use. We have ways to query knowledge bases that can use natural language to say, where's my training manual, and it'll go away and find the thing that's relevant to you. So people are using these. We're starting to see an emergence there, but beyond that, there isn't a huge amount of uptake necessarily. And really, in terms of the future, we're looking at what you might say is the adjacent possible. So this is things where we already have some good levels of machine learning, for example. So people in manufacturing will recognize things like demand planning that's been around for years, this ability to take large data sets and predict what's needed for the future. So I think the areas where AI is going to do more is going to be around things like that. It's going to be around things like asset maintenance. Asset maintenance for years has been about, proactive asset maintenance, taking the data to learn when something is going to be exhausted and be able to repair it early. So, inserting artificial intelligence into spaces like demand planning and asset management is probably one of the key next steps. The other areas that people are looking at and starting to invest more in are things like design. So the design phase, starting to maybe take some time out of those longer term design processes by automating some of the more simple parts, and then just general process optimization, really just trying to take as many of those kind of repeatable, simple, computerized processes and put them through a tool that can effectively just do that job for you. So I can see why people are still skeptical, but there is probably a way forwards with this.
Great. I was wondering, Phill, I love your view as well. Is AI something that Brompton Bicycle is looking at, or already in use, or use cases being explored? What are your thoughts? You're mute at the moment, Phill.
Classic. I think within the manufacturing environment, which is where probably best talking about, I'd probably just echo what Andrew's saying. We've developed some user cases that for sort of 5 years time, and then we're looking at if that's what we think could be useful, then what would we need to have in place in order to enable that? And a lot of it does come back down to data. We've looked at how humans are going to be operating in factories in the sort of like 5-10 year horizon. And people are there going to be generally to make very complicated decisions, because a lot of the simple decision making is going to be being automated, pulling together disparate pieces of data, or where data integrity is not strong, or where the digital and the physical meet, and somebody needs to steward the sort of the interface between those two. And one of the examples that we're working on at the moment as one of these sort of user cases is an issue in the manufacturing environment where a quality engineer might need to go to support a line stoppage. And what information might that quality engineer want to have available to them? Because when you look at what information they would want available and how that information may be best overlaid, maybe it's using augmented reality goggles to overlay schematics or digital models on top of the product that you're looking at. Maybe it's pulling inspection reports from some CMM or sort of optical inspection report from the last goods inwards checking. Maybe it's digging into the PFMEA to look at the 5 most likely things that are going to have caused that problem, to give you like a prioritized checklist for what to do when you get there. It may also be sending, you've got to think long horizon to start thinking about not being constrained by the now, but maybe it sends off an AMR to go and get the 5 inspection devices that you might need to go and check the in situ. So you've got to think fairly long term, I think, with digital. Think about, and especially with AI, think about the data integrity that you'd need for the user cases that you think are going to be most likely. And then start making a plan to make those data sort of sets more compatible. We're not doing a huge amount in the manufacturing environment right now, but I think it all stems from having a longer term plan and understanding how it adds value. Not just doing it because it's a cool thing that everyone talks about, but doing it because you see it solving a real problem that makes ultimately a customer's life better. Maybe they get the bike a bit faster. Maybe they get a product that they enjoy a little bit more. But how do you keep the customer central to what you do and make it a real business problem that you're solving, and work in that way? And I think you generally get guided towards doing the right things.
And I think, Phill, I would add to that when you go through an ERP implementation like you did, ensuring that you get a really good quality data cleanse as part of that. You use the vanilla processes that you talked about, so that the kind of path of least resistance for the users is to enter good data in a nice controlled way. And then start to think about what your data governance is like to, keep control of that data quality over the long term, because you could have your vision for something in 5 years, but by the time you get all that way there, unfortunately, your data that you cleaned 5 years ago has not maintained its levels of quality.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's something that AI can assist with in its own right, is actually highlighting the anomalies in the millions of lines of data that the business oversees, billions of lines probably, and spotting the anomalies. Because that's actually quite a thing that's playing to AI strengths right now. So it can be a tool to help you get there. For exactly the thing that you were just highlighting as a risk. So I think, you've got to be smart about how you think about it, and that's where conversations with people that know a bit more are useful. So yeah, thanks for adding that.
Yeah, agree. Tim, I'd love your view as well. From your experience, what are the biggest challenges that manufacturers face when they go through a digital transformation program, and how do they overcome these obstacles?
Yeah, I think that's I mean, it's really interesting that what Andy and Phill were saying really about data integrity. So I think that is, it is so critical for a business, because if you're going to be making decisions on what the data is telling you, it absolutely has to be right, or you have to trust it. And then you also have to make sure that you can control, you can put the governance in place to make sure that it's reliable. And as you do more system integration, that's where you'd have to put those controls and that in place. I think in terms of some of the other challenges, and I think Nina highlighted some of those when she was talking about the Made Smarter program, some of the findings from that, and we're a partner in that, so we see that firsthand. I think there's challenges with regards to resources within businesses, in terms of, have they got people available to support these types of programs? It's really important when you embark on either an ERP or any sort of technology adoption process, is that the knowledge, if you like, and the skills are embedded in the business. Because once your vendor walks away, you're kind of on your own, unless you've got a long-standing, high-level investment program with that particular vendor. You really need to be developing those skill sets within the business. So that's really quite critical when you're considering a technology, a new technology adoption project. I think some of the challenges that we see are where businesses are uncertain about the right technology to choose, how we select what's the right solution for our particular problem, and actually stepping back and I quite like what Phill was saying about that 3 to 5 year viewpoint. Rather than think of a specific solution that solves a particular problem, step back and treat it as a bit of a strategic plan. It's where are we now, where do we see ourselves, and what are the technologies that are going to support us in doing that? Because technology is really the enabler. Fundamentally, you've got business processes and you've got people that need to be operating those business processes. Where are you going to get the benefits from using that technology? And then how are you going to make a business case for it? What are you going to do? How are you going to justify the investment in the technology? Is it going to give you the benefits you expect to do that? And I think there's quite a lot of good examples about that, but it's more than just cost saving. It's predominantly things like improvements in right first time, and improvements in on-time delivery, those types of things, and the value they have to the business, and increased capacity, because invariably you're going to get more out of your assets and your process. What's the value to that? And small improvements that you can achieve through taking waste out of the system, improve decision making, or even allowing your solutions to make those decisions, are going to give you some of those net gains. So that's quite key. But you know, often or not, if you can find someone to help you do that, a trusted advisor who's providing unbiased support, they can often help you. And I'm only saying that because I work for an organisation that provides that sort of support. They can help you look holistically at what your challenges are, and I'd help you put together a plan for identifying what's the right technology, how's it going to benefit you, and de-risk that decision making, that investment.
I like it. I'm completely agree. Like having a strong business case based on, you know, benefits that you want to achieve after the project is essential, right? Rather than we're going to implement technology X, because that's not the goal in its own right. Yeah. And bringing the right combination of, you know, knowledge from the vendor about the product or the solution versus the business knowledge versus the current technical architecture and integration points, that all needs to come together to run a successful program. Phill, I was just wondering that there's one thing that you mentioned earlier that I find a really interesting topic, where sort of digital meets the physical. Have you got examples on sort of IoT at Brompton Bicycles, or of using that sort of visibility of the manufacturing process and how you link technology with the actual production process and get improvements from there?
Yeah, so probably about 3 years ago, we became pretty interested in the environment, like the air environment inside the factory. Brazing is quite a warm process, and that obviously has an effect on the environment that we manufacture in. And as we were ramping up, we were putting in more braze bays. We just wanted to give ourselves confidence the working environment that we were responsible for was still a good, healthy, clean environment. So what we looked at, and it was a really weird sort of coincidence, but somebody that was working with in making or designing an in-house MES system to support planning through our assembly lines was also pretty good at scripting and also sort of hardware development as well. And he ended up creating some nodes, some like sort of gateway devices with monitoring systems attached to them. And we built our own circuitry, we built our own boards, installed all the sensors, got them all calibrated. Then that fed up into cloud processor, and that also we set sort of limits so that if they went over a threshold, then it would activate an alarm. It would trigger an email to somebody to go and inspect the system. And it was quite a nice sort of a physical event, a physical sensor going up into a digital environment, cloud-hosted environment, the analysis being done to a set of rules, and then coming back into the physical world with feedback, screens on the shop floor so people understood the environment that they were working in, but also alarms and triggers and longer-term trend analysis based on what the sort of the monitoring had said. So we did that in-house because we tried finding partners that would do it, but it felt like everyone was trying to extract money from us rather than give us value. And that's probably a bit of a cynical view, but I think lots of SMEs will also face that. So I think don't be afraid to try something yourself, because you'll probably learn more than if you just engage a third party. And you never know who's got a bit of a talent on the sideline in your team that might just want an excuse to have a trial. We're not beholden to that system now in a way that we would never do something different. But I think we learned so much about it that actually it gave us confidence to go and do 2 or 3 other projects. So I think the learning from it was try something maybe a little bit small. Don't be afraid that it might take a bit longer, and embrace the fact that it's something in-house, because when something breaks, the person who made it sits 3 desks from you and will be desperately keen to understand what went wrong so they can learn themselves. So see it, part of this is about a learning journey, not just about the end goal of having good data or good insight. Actually, it's a technology that's growing so quickly, you have to be very consciously learning about it. Otherwise, you'll very, very quickly fall behind.
Great. Thanks, Phill. I just realized it's probably time for us to move to the Q&A side, because some questions might have been coming in through the webinar. Thanks, everybody. Bal, would you be happy to take us through the questions that have come in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. That was a really interesting discussion. So, James, we'd had one question come through, which I'll pose to yourself. Is growth in turnover in the sector due to greater demand for product, or simply an incident of price rises resulting in static sales and profit?
Yeah, it's a good question. Generally speaking, it's I think the latter of whoever asked that question. It is the inflationary effect. I mean, we've been doing some work around this, some interesting thoughts. We were looking at turnover just the other week, and what's interesting is since 2020, now this is the average turnover of the UK manufacturing, the average turnover of an enterprise in the UK's manufacturing sector. It's obviously going to be skewed upwards by those large companies, but since 2020, or in 2020, it was 3.6 million. And in 2022, which is the latest data because it's lagged, is 4.6 million. But I think what's particularly interesting, and all the while, it's the cost, because you can kind of control for inflation by saying, right, okay, how do we see what is inflation and what's not? If we take those business costs, as is from the ONS in the annual business survey, we take those costs, so employment, goods, services, materials, and capex, right, and held warehouse stocks or work in progress. That as a proportion of turnover has increased over the past, well, since 2008, but it's particularly taken speed since 2020 as well. So, I mean, I'm not really revealing anything that any UK manufacturing business wouldn't have seen on the ground themselves, but it's interesting to see it borne out in that national statistics data that we can quite readily demonstrate and map that cost as a proportion of that turnover. And what do you lose there? You lose margin. So if we look to perhaps the point of all this is that net rate of return, i.e., profit, manufacturing has since 2019 it's almost step changed, right? And there's a really interesting graph. I'm going to show it to you right now, but I recommend you look it up. If you put in ONS net rate of return manufacturing into Google, you'll find a really interesting graph where the services economy since 2013 to 2023 Q2 has pretty much sat around the 15% mark for net rate of return. The manufacturing sector was really there a bit below it in 2013, but has been sort of consistently there up until 2019. And in 2019, complete disaggregation of the services, average services net rate of return in manufacturing, where so manufacturing used to sit at around 15% up until 2019. And then now, since the end of 2020, pretty consistently at about 7.5%. So significant, and really details, I think, what the question asker was hinting at, that's what's taken the loss, and it's the new standard, and it has been for the past 4 years, that the average profit rate is at around that 7.5%, having previously been 15%, but critically, the services sector has remained throughout that 10-year period at oscillating around that 15% mark.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Conscious of time, but I thought if we can do one question on the digital focus. So the question we've had come through, I feel like it could be quite long. So when the need for digital transformation is identified in a business, how do you see businesses have set about undertaking the task? I feel like that's quite a big question. So maybe we change it slightly of what's your kind of one piece of advice that manufacturers need to be thinking about when they're about to undertake the task. I'll kind of go through the digital panelists. So Phill, what's your one piece of advice?
I think just think long term, and think long term on what good looks like before you delve into what you're going to do next.
Okay, brilliant. Andy?
Yeah, so I would definitely agree with that. The number of clients we see who think that the digital transformation is about doing what they do at the moment in a constrained system, but just doing it better, versus people who say, hold on a second, we should actually adopt the best practices that are relevant to our industry and go and do that. But if I was to say something separate, I would say think about this for the longer term. This is not just something where you're going to spend a year putting a new digitized system in and then stop dead. Make sure that you're standing up the people and processes to take this, yes, during that delivery element, but also thinking about how this big investment in digital can actually go forwards for the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years after that. What's your continuous improvement plan to take the thing you built and make it better and better and better?
Thanks, Andy. Tim?
Yeah, just building what Phill and Andy have said. Really, think long term, think holistically about what digital means to your business. Where are those opportunities, and build yourself a plan and a roadmap of where you are now and where you want to get to, and what are the things that need to fall into place. And that's beyond just the technologies. It's all about the people and the processes as well that support that. And find a trusted advisor.
Brilliant. Jeroen, I know you were hosting the panel. Is there a tip you'd like to add in there?
I just think make sure that you identify the people across the competencies that you need, from technology architecture to business architecture, that really want to invest their time in making the business better, that really bought into the solution that they're building and sort of own it. I think that's a really key part.
Thank you. And Nina?
So I'm going to go slightly different. I agree with all my previous speakers, but definitely maybe sometimes it's worth starting small steps, small investment, maybe invest, look around in a cheaper sensor. It might make a difference. And also looking around into universities that are in your local area, any different support systems that you might use as well.